Hello, everybody. Stephen Mead here with Domicile Real Estate for people who love houses. And this is our Southern California housing market update for August 3rd, 2021. One thing that I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit that I think is important, and I want to talk about something because of where the data is pointing, that the market is different in a way maybe than we expected, but I think there's a very important distinction. So rather than kind of give you a little bit of a lecture up front, which I think is kind of boring, what I'll do is I'm going to jump into the stats and I'm going to kind of insert my arguments of why there is a very, very big difference between a hot market and a dysfunctional one, and what those differences in that market are and how those differences affect you. Because I think ultimately that's really what this comes down to, right? Is having information to make good choices. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So we're going to go back to our beginning here of our slide. So probably the most important thing to talk about is something that has not changed over the last several weeks. And that is our inventory level of total active listings. So if you look here, I mean, we've really struggled with inventory. We started to see it going up a little bit, and then we kind of hit like a new jump. And I mean, it's receded a little bit here for our $1 to $2 million homes, and it's continued to go up a little bit for our under 1 million. But I think the important part here is, you know, in this under 1 million category across LA and Orange counties, we are above 6,000 active listings. Whereas, you know, look at where we were for most of the spring, you know, right around 5,000 here. This is a pretty significant, you know, difference in inventory levels, and that hasn't changed the last few weeks. I mean, it looks like we have a new normal for level of inventory. And, you know, when we do our first time buyer forecast, you'll notice that it actually looks very similar to the inventory numbers that we saw in the fall. So definitely still some very good news out there. And I'm going to tell you, this is good news whether you're a buyer or a seller. Even though if you're a seller, you might not think it's good news, but I'm going to tell you why it's good news in a second. But there is a little bit of trouble. You know, we kind of saw a jump in new listings, and then it receded and it receded again. And it did it across both of our price categories. If you look at where we are, we're kind of at the high end of where we've been, right? For our under 1 million. Same thing here if you're talking about where we are in new listings for our $1 to $2 million properties. And you know, I'm painting a picture here that we have mixed results, but they're not really as mixed as they seem. And I'm going to tell you kind of what I think is really going on with this. Now, if we look at our new escrows, right, you know, it's kind of interesting. This luxury market actually has continued to climb. That was a little bit surprising. We saw a little bit of a week-to-week drop, but I mean, realistically, these are higher numbers of new escrows than we've seen all spring. If you go up here to our, you know, new escrows in our under 1 million category, right? This number has been really constant since back here in February. It dipped a little bit, and I think we all thought we were starting the beginning of a changing market, and then it rebounded, and it's kind of right back up here, riding this line of 3,000 new escrows. If we look at that, like maybe it's a little bit lower than it's been, but you know, I don't think we saw this tapering off maybe that some people were expecting to see when this happened. So while that leads us to sort of an absorption rate that maybe paints a little bit of a different picture than I think people thought we were going. So I want you to take a look here at this absorption rate. We're going to look at the absolute numbers really quick first. You know, for our luxury market, we are actually in the high 80s, and we are in the sort of mid 80s here for our under $1 million market. And I think what's important to note here is there's a couple distinctions. One is, let's take a look at this is one of the only times that this number is actually crossed where our luxury market has been more competitive than our under $1 million market. Like, I mean, look, we flirted with it here and just passed here at the beginning of the year, but that was kind of a weird time because we're right around New Year's. This echoes something that a mortgage lender told me today, which was that their jumbo department, and these are of course jumbo size loans, typically used for purchasing homes over $1 million, that the jumbo department is overwhelmed. And I don't think that's a coincidence. We're kind of seeing multiple points of data. But what I think that is really important to look at here is two other things. One is we both saw kind of starting through July, these absorption rates tumbled and started going down. And I think we thought we were returning to, say, a more normal market. And in some ways we are. But then we saw these numbers rebound right back up. Now, if you draw this line here, you see a little bit of a trend line kind of heading down. But boy, this $1 to $2 million market, I mean, we haven't seen absorption rates this high in that price range really ever throughout the spring. I mean, these are very high absorption rate numbers. So now I'm going to tell you why it's important to understand the distinction between a hot market and a dysfunctional one. And I'm going to use a good example. I think anybody who went to Costco in the early days of the pandemic will identify with this. Now, imagine you have a Costco store and you have 1,000 people who come in every day and buy toilet paper. They buy a big case of toilet paper. 1,000 people every day are coming in buying toilet paper. Now imagine a world also where you have a truck coming every day that is delivering, maybe 1,000, 1,100 packages of toilet paper, right? So you've got pretty good parity of toilet paper coming in and toilet paper going out. Okay, that's kind of the market that we are in right now, right? Is that toilet paper is coming in, toilet paper is going out. And we're going to call them similar rates. Sorry, I know my screen's bouncing a little bit there. Okay. But earlier this spring, I'm going to tell you, we had that exact same situation, but imagine a Costco store where the shelves are barren and then a load of 1,000 cases of toilet paper comes in, the door is open, everybody runs and grabs them, and now by lunchtime, there's no toilet paper left. Contrast that with a world where maybe there were 1,500 cases of toilet paper at the beginning of the day. 1,000 people come in, but there's still 500 left. How do you think people behave differently when they feel like they're going to run out of cases of toilet paper versus when they think there are enough there? And I think that's the difference between a hot market and a dysfunctional one. And when a market is a little dysfunctional, that's when we start seeing buyers agreeing to basically crazy things, right? And we see buyers doing things like saying whatever to get a listing and then backing out. The market we have now is still a very brisk market, right? This is still a hot market. 1,000 cases of toilet paper come in and 1,000 cases of toilet paper go out. But the difference is the shelves aren't nearly as barren. And I think that really affects the way buyers and sellers make decisions. And I think it's a healthier market to be in. So, the bad news is if you were a buyer and you thought a few weeks ago this was the beginning of the end, we're going to be on easy street before long, I'm just not seeing that happening. There's a couple of reasons for that. Mainly, we have seen some downward interest rate movement, but I think demand is still very strong for housing. The difference is I don't think it feels like we are in a world that is crazy and circus-like. And I think people, buyers and sellers, make better decisions. Now, if you're a seller, I think the great news is if you're planning on buying another property, right, like you have a lot more choice out there. But also if you're a seller, I think how solid your deals are, how solid are the buyers that you're picking, I think you have a lot more certainty in your transactions going forward. I think both sides are ultimately more comfortable with how the market is. And I think that's going to show in that behavior of buyers and sellers. Okay, so we're going to jump back in here. We've covered our absorption rate. Now let's look at closed prices. And my usual disclaimer, this is based on data that is 4 to 6 weeks old. But we see the luxury market very strong. But I want you to take a look at the big picture here. The big picture is you see increases across all these ranges in about until April. And then the rate of increase is slower, right? And in fact, I would argue even in this luxury space, this 75th percentile space, this doesn't even really seem like it's gone up a huge amount. And it's a much gentler curve, right, than we saw earlier in the spring. Things are a little bit flatter. Our entry level is still pretty strong, but I want people to understand that there is a limit to where buyers will go, and I think we're starting to bump up on those. That's why inventory is built up a little bit. People still want houses. They still want houses at today's prices, but I think a lot of buyers are signaling they may not want houses that are 10% more than they are today. And I think the market's responding to that in a very rational way. And like I said, a hot market can be a rational market or a dysfunctional, irrational market. And we really want that rational market. Now, this is another measure that we kind of use of competition. And this is, we look at all the homes that went on the market in the last 14 days, and we say, how many of these are still active? And what you notice is there was kind of a trough here in Marchish, maybe even a little bit later, March, April, for our luxury market, and sort of towards March. And then these numbers have been going up. And in this market, what up means is up means a less competitive market. So I do see a trend, right, that this market is getting easier, not harder, especially when you look a little bit longer. Week to week, it was better 2 weeks ago if you're a buyer. But today, if you look back across the trend here, I think things are getting a little bit easier. And that's kind of compounded by this list close ratio, right? We kind of a huge outlandish number that hit for 1 week. I'm going to call that kind of a little bit of data noise on our 1 to 2 million. But look, even this, our 1 to 2 million peaked, right? Maybe around 104.5%. And I think it's going to start heading down, but also look at where we are with our under 1 million. We peaked a little over 104%. And then this kind of is having a gentle downward slope. I think that this is a sign, what this measures is, this is ultimately a measure of the difference in attitudes between sellers and buyers about what their home is worth. So when you see these numbers that are way over 100%, it means sellers think their house is worth something down here and buyers think their house is worth up here. That's a disconnect, right? Like that is a sign of a market that is moving rapidly upward. But now that we've got a little bit more stability in these numbers, that tells you, that this is not a market that's so outpacing what everybody thinks is happening. And I think it's important to kind of keep that distinction there and understand that this is another piece of data that's kind of supporting a market that is at least a little bit more mature in terms of pricing. It's still a very busy market. If we look at our days on market, we see a pretty steady number here in our luxury 1 to 2 million. Again, we see a little bit of a rise up here to 20 days, but I mean, look, we've been in this kind of 18 to 20 day pocket pretty much since the end of March in our under 1 million price category. I'm not ready to say that this is any kind of trend. We see it bumps on this 20 days periodically and then comes back down. I don't think that that's a sign of a big change. Finally, we have our affordability. This is one of my favorite things, and I'm going to go off screen share. I can't emphasize how important it is to understand that consumers make decisions based on what they can afford. It sounds so simple, and yet people sort of ignore this. And when we jump back in here, I think this really is telling us the story of what's happening in this market. And what's happening is, buyers, the market was essentially underpriced. Then it got in this 110% to 120% quadrant, and it's kind of been bouncing within this range. This is the comfort range for our market of affordability. And just as a reminder to everybody, what this means is that the payment on a median priced home is roughly 10 to 20% more than it was in June of 2018. That is over 3 years ago. I think we've seen wage growth that is in line to support this, meaning that when compared with wages, right, and this is how consumers make decisions, compared with wages, homes are about as affordable as they were 3 years ago. So I'm going to repeat that. Homes are about as affordable as they were 3 years ago when you were talking about this payment affordability and kind of seeing our happy range in here. Okay. Finally, we have our prevailing mortgage rates, and I think this is still driving a little bit of this enhanced demand that we're seeing is coming from this. We peaked around 3.2%, then we went right back to 3. We stayed in that range, and then the last month or so, we've kind of dipped back into these high 2s. I think that has helped a lot of buyers who felt like maybe they missed the boat. They are jumping in. I do think that that's uh, boosting a little bit of our demand at the moment. I think if you see interest rates go up, you'll see demand pull back. Prices, I think, will immediately stagnate if that happens. Again, it's about staying in this realistic affordability zone. So what's necessary for this to change? What has to change for prices to change? Well, if interest rates start going up, that's going to push this number higher, and the only way to get this number back down would be dropping prices. But we also have inflation, right? And we have wage growth. Wage growth also allows this number to go higher safely. So kind of some interesting stuff to keep an eye on. I know a lot of people were hoping, is this the beginning of a market that's going to start looking more normal? I do think it looks a lot more normal. We're not seeing these sort of double-digit price growth months, but and we are seeing greater inventory. But I think understand that doesn't mean that this is an easy market and that you won't face competition. Especially for the most desirable homes, you will very much see competition. Anyhow, thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, especially on the likes. That gets our videos shown to more people. Obviously, we love your questions, your comments. If you are in need of buying or selling real estate services in Southern California, definitely reach out to us. We would love to help apply our expertise to your particular scenario and your goals. Anyhow, we'll see you again on Friday when we do our first time home buyer market update that's geared towards the entry level end of the market. We will see you really soon.